So without further ado, I'd like to make introductions to our featured speakers this morning. Joining us, Rick Hinton is the Vice President for Portal Solutions and is a enterprise collaboration expert. And Christian Buckley with Metalogics is their product evangelist and is a renowned speaker on the subject of enterprise collaboration. And so without further ado, I'll hand things over to Rick. Rick?
Great, thanks, Frank. Appreciate everyone joining us today. I think we're going to have a great session and talking about social and specifically talking about SharePoint 2013 and Yammer. So a couple of things in terms of the approach today and the agenda. We're going to start out with more or less kind of setting the context around social enterprise. So we'll talk about in some of the research that's been published recently, looking at predictions in terms of where social is headed. Is this a passing fad or is it a long-term trend? We'll also talk a little bit about the opinions and attitudes towards social, both from IT decision makers as well as end users. And then also briefly touch on the intent of organizations to adopt social tools and technologies. So what are folks doing now? What are they planning to do in the near future? So we'll talk briefly about that. So that's kind of the setting the context portion, and then we'll go right into the Q&A session with Christian, and we'll get Christian's take on social strategies and how to think about implementing social, and specifically the opportunities and challenges faced by organizations looking at SharePoint and Yammer. And we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So as Frank mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to post those in the box on the GoToMeeting screen, and we will try to answer as many as possible. Okay, so let's jump right in. First thing we want to talk about is kind of
welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Are looking for. So if you think in terms of when it really gets down to priorities, and you ask the same question of those organizations, so looking forward in terms of your implementation of social enterprise tools, will something like a Facebook be part of the plan? And when the IT decision makers were asked to prioritize, Facebook, which was their favorite, quickly fell down the bottom of the list in terms of what they will actually implement going forward. So we've talked about the kind of consumer-based solutions that enter into the picture. So bringing it back to SharePoint in our world and what we're going to be talking about today, we can take a look at kind of the attitudes and around SharePoint and social. So Portal Solutions co-sponsored a research study last year with AIM that looked at adoption of SharePoint and the different aspects and capabilities of SharePoint to determine, where were their gaps and what are the intentions going forward in terms of investment. So if you look at the chart here, this is looking at the net change in spending on certain capabilities and functions within SharePoint that organizations anticipate in the next 12 months. So if you look at the very top of the list, far and away the largest share of spending or largest increase in spending is around additional social feeds and functions. So obviously there's
and Rick, I think as well, Rick, if you look down that list as well, there's a number of items, just as I was reading through this, that are also social activities that are further down. Microblogging and activity streams is a social activity. And I would probably, I'd position number 2 there, mobile device extensions. A lot of those that are being developed within the community are around social activities as well. So that number is probably even higher.
Yeah, exactly. The cumulative effect of all those. Exactly. That's a good point, Christian. So if you look at, this is looking at where the intended change in spending. So So why the emphasis on that, and really what's at play there? And really, if you look back, and this is looking at the various functions and what has not met expectations, and you'll see social tools and as one of the largest areas of where the expectations of functionality have not been met, significantly not been met. I mean, it's the second highest one. So really, it's a byproduct of the capabilities that were in SharePoint 2010, and this research study was completed literally right before and published right before Yammer came into the Microsoft picture. So this was completed right before the Yammer acquisition. So obviously, the landscape has now changed, and the entry of Yammer into this conversation has obviously created a great bit of interest and excitement, but also uncertainty and confusion. So how do the two solutions play together? What is the best fit for your organization? That's where we are right now, and hence why we're together here today to get Christian's take on the state of social, and specifically around SharePoint and Yammer. So Christian, I appreciate you joining us this morning, and I know it's early on the West Coast.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So hopefully you're fully caffeinated and ready to go. So wanted to touch on, before we kind of dive into the kind of more features and functions and talk about Yammer and SharePoint, wanted to just start it off with your thoughts on some of the critical challenges organizations face around social, and what you think is important for people to focus on.
Sure. There's a, I mean, and thank you for having me participate today. This is something that for a lot of organizations, it's relatively new. I mean, this has been a topic that I've been speaking on for a little over a decade now, actually. Some of the keywords and certainly some of the players have evolved and changed. But I was reflecting this morning on the fact that my blog, which is now buckleyplanet.com, was actually started as a project called Samaritan Web back in 2002, where I was beginning to catalog social tools and talk about various integrations and how they played out in the enterprise. So this has been around for quite some time. But I always, to answer this question directly, I always say first and foremost, organizations need to understand that social is not this panacea for solving all ills. Looking back at the last decade of SharePoint deployment failures, and there have been a lot of successful SharePoint. I'm a SharePoint guy. I'm very passionate about SharePoint. But where companies ran into trouble was primarily around not having a plan. So not tying the tools to their business activities, and not doing a good job of helping end users to understand how to use the tools and how to do their jobs better using the tools. And so organizations, if that's the problem that organizations have had with SharePoint, where organizations recognize that they've not had the adoption, the number of users in the organization that have not been using the platform, and they're not engaged. And when I mean engagement on the platform, meaning that, well, they log in and upload a document and then they get right back out. Engagement is like they're staying on there. They're productive in the tool. So organizations run those same risks, really, with social. If they're not taking the steps to understand how do these new tools fit in with what our people need to do their jobs, how are they going to get more accomplished? How are they going to work better together? If they're not asking those questions and aligning the social platforms with those, with the business, then they're going to have the same failure rate as they did with their SharePoint deployments, with their structured collaboration. So you simply can't turn it on, walk away, and hope that it just works, that people will just get it.
Right, exactly. And it sounds like what you're advocating is just because social is new and different doesn't mean the kind of core principles of how you roll out technology and adopt technology are necessarily different, right?
No.
Yeah.
It's funny. So Dan Holm and I, Dan Holm's another SharePoint MVP, and he and I were giving a keynote at the European SharePoint conference earlier this year, and one of the most controversial slides that we had up on the screen, and it's kind of an iconic image. The picture of it, it says on one side, SharePoint doesn't matter, and then on the other side, with the bill that popped up, the business matters. And that's really the driving message, that you cannot start this conversation around technology. You need to start it with an understanding of what the business needs are.
Right, exactly. Great. So we kind of talked about the the kind of the challenges and how the organizations should focus on this. As far as obviously organizations need to make business cases for the applications of tools. So what do you see as kind of the upside for organizations? What are the opportunities around social?
It's there's a few things. So I often write and talk about social in a little bit different way than I've heard others, and certainly Microsoft. This perspective is a little bit different. I talk about social being another layer of the search experience. I think people inherently get that social about team building and collaboration and kind of that aspect of it. But if you think about it, like put your information architecture hat on, where if you think of the content that's created and even the conversations that happen within your organization, at some point someone needs to go and search and find that document, find that PowerPoint, find that conversation that happened between somebody on the product team and somebody within the support organization. And so it goes back to that search. So hand in hand with strong social is strong search. And social adds to that search experience because it adds context and it adds metadata to your content. And it's done through the dialogue, through that peer interaction, tagging content, liking it, rating it, enriching that content, and then surfacing that dialogue in the results. And if you think about it, it says if you have an email exchange or you have a hallway conversation, usually that information is then lost. You go back to your desk, you work on something, you try to type in your notes into the document, but you lose that context. And I'm not saying don't go have a hallway conversation, or if you don't send emails back and forth and have a discussion, if that's the way that your organization works. But having that, because I'm certainly not saying that everyone should sit at their desk, sit on their device, doing nothing but on social. It's like I have a 13-year-old. We don't need more of that. But is capturing that information, adding context, and I always like to just very quickly kind of share this example of two documents that are entered into your system of record of equal value. Both are similarly named. They both have similarly applied taxonomy. So you entered them both into the system. They're both searchable now in the system. But if one of those documents, I go in and I upload both of those documents. Rick, you go in, you see document number 1, you comment on it, you rate it, you like it, you share it with 5 other people. Those people whom I don't know come in, they see it, they talk about the document, they share it with other people. All of that rich activity around that one document. Now, a month later, somebody goes into the system, does a search. That document with all of that rich metadata rises to the top of the search results, as well as it's now being found through tags and through people and expert profiles that would have otherwise never been surfaced through that search for that document had not there been some social interaction. I think that is the power of social. And honestly, I don't think that my opinion is that Microsoft and Yammer teams are doing enough to talk about that aspect of it. But then there's certainly, the cultural, the team building aspects of that, how to improve workplace interactions. There's definitely huge value add in social around that side.
Right. So you think what's missing from the conversation is kind of findability, reusability, and social in that context, right?
I do. I think it's inferred in a lot of what's published out there, and I think there's still a lot going on out there to educate people about what social is, how it fits in. So it's not just something that people inherently get. And so you do need to have those conversations. But I just think that there's so much focus on the team building, collaboration, and this is almost kind of a clinical approach to how does this actually providing value to an organization. It's actually improving the performance and quality and the user experience around search.
Gotcha. Yep. No, that makes total sense. So when you look at organizations kind of understanding their needs and objectives, and then kind of applying those to platform selection, tool selection, what are some of the things that organizations need to look at, and from an approach perspective and so forth?
Yeah, so again, I think it really comes down to the soft skills aspect of this. In fact, I was just down in, flew down and back I was down in South Africa for a couple weeks doing some events, and I was reading on the plane a book that I had purchased and had sat there for about 6 months and finally took with me, called The Social Organization by who is that? That's by Anthony Bradley and Mark McDonald. And honestly, flipped through some of it, just very quickly. It was kind of, generic, but they make a fantastic point. They're both out of Gartner, so it's one of those books that's just, Gartner analysis pulled together. And they talk about the social organization not being a company that is, hot-wired to a specific social platform or different social tools, but one that really kind of ascends above that. It's an organization that as new problems arise, new projects arise, it could be as small as we're having difficulty on this team figuring out how do we go and prioritize the features for this next project. Or we have a delivery schedule, we have this external partner that's a difficult partner, and how do we best communicate those things? But these organizations that recognize we have all these social tools that are out there, there's different scenarios that fit these different needs. We understand here are the tools that we have in our tool belt, and so their first thought is who should be involved, and then what is the best way to include these people. It could be an external network where we pull in various partners into this. It could be that we need to have a company-wide have a discussion around this topic. It could be that we need to restrict this to 5, 10 people in a private group and have this conversation. It could be that it needs to be more of a community effort, which is done in our Sharepoint portal. It could be that it's around a document or a series of documents or a workflow or business activity that is part of your structured collaboration activities inside of SharePoint. So a social organization recognizes that no single tool can do all of those things well, and that depending on the need, depending on the players involved, depending on the organization, there's these different options that are out there. And so I think to your point, they need to tailor their needs based on what they're trying to accomplish. And the harder thing about that, Rick, is always like, do I understand the way that my organization works?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a good manager understands, what his team, what his direct reports are good at, and how to leverage those things. I'm not going to go and ask my business analyst with deep analytical skills who is fearful of getting up in front of an audience to go present to 100 people. I'm going to pair that person with somebody who has that skill set. Similarly, I'm not going to go and ask of, like, if this is something that needs to be tied to structured collaboration, I'm not going to go, and tied to specific documents and workflow, go throw this out into a generic Yammer broad conversation for the whole company where it's not appropriate for that task at hand.
Right, right.
But I know I've got those tools. I know that
Yeah.
they're available to me.
Yeah, exactly. So just to build on the whole concept of the social organization, I mean, do you think there are certain corporate cultures that are better able or ready to to implement social tools? So are there cultural impediments, or is it a matter of proper methodology and approach?
Well, I think that I think there is. I mean, the data that you shared at the beginning is a perfect example of that, where all these organizations that are using Facebook, usually you can look at those end user patterns and identify clearly we're not offering a secure, scalable, a solution for our end users' needs because they're going around us. They're using Facebook. They're using Dropbox. They're going and using these very risky externally, without transparency, without non-compliant tools. That is a clear sign that your organization is ready for secure, internal supported solutions. So looking at what people are using, and this is one of those things where you're regularly going out. Are you surveying your end users? Are you talking to them one-on-one in groups about how they're using tools today and what's lacking? That is a soft skill. That is a project management business analyst activity that you need to be doing on a regular basis to make sure that your people are adopting what you have in place and are engaged. And if they're out using those consumer tools, then you've got a gap. Your people are not adopting, your people are not engaged.
Right, right. Okay, so wanted to kind of turn the conversation towards, specifically towards Yammer, SharePoint 2013. Now, there are obviously now a wider array of options for social. So, the question is, how do companies kind of start to get their arms around this and determine, what is the best fit?
Yeah, and I think just along what I just said, along those lines, how are they working today? I mean, it's and we were chatting about this beforehand. I mean, the title of this webinar, it's not really an either-or discussion. Yes, Microsoft is pushing hard on their vision for the future, which is online, and therefore, Yammer from a social standpoint. And there will never be an on-premises version of Yammer. Microsoft has been very clear about that. Yammer is a cloud-based solution. Having said that, SharePoint Online, that's part of Office 365 platform, is not yet, it doesn't yet have parity with the SharePoint on-prem feature set. It just isn't. So for many organizations, the question should be asked, do you primarily need a structured collaboration platform, which is, SharePoint 2013, or there's even, plenty of customers that are still out there broadly using SharePoint 2010 on-prem. And, I have a very popular session where I talk about getting the most out of SharePoint 2010 and being aware of the solutions that are out there. There are plenty of social features that are available, onboard on those on-prem solutions as well as through the third-party ecosystem. But for organizations where structured collaboration is less important today, and where they just need more of the social or unstructured collaboration, then Yammer is the best platform out there today, hands down from the competitors. Microsoft bought the best. Long term, I know that there are a lot of organizations that are figuring out, well, if I have SharePoint on-prem today, and we're slowly moving workloads over to Office 365 or maybe to some other private hosted platform, how can I start taking advantage of these things? How are the two going to work together? So that is this hybrid model. Long term, there will be some deeper integrations between the two, between the Yammer and the cloud-based platforms and the on-prem. But the point of that is to make it easier for people to make the transition to the cloud. I do believe that eventually we're all going to be out in the cloud. But that transition, I may, where Microsoft thinks it's going to happen very quickly. I've been working in the cloud space. I worked for a startup back in 2001 to 2003 where we built a SharePoint-like hosted collaboration platform that was integrated into our ERP and supply chain platforms. And we had all these same issues onboarding these massive manufacturing customers in it. And we thought, in the next 2 to 4 years, everybody's going to be using tools like this. And here we are, 10 years later, still making the same comments. It's going to be a slow but steady transition, in my mind, from on-premises into the cloud. But there's also a large number of customers that will never move into the cloud. So it's just, you need to understand, what are my workloads? Like if I'm trying to do external collaboration with partners, these cloud solutions are the way to go. And you just need to figure out, and you need to understand what do those interactions have to do with my local, my on-prem activities? Are they related? Do I need to have that integration, or are they completely separate workloads?
Yeah, and that's pretty.
And I see your next slide is on the hybrid.
Well, you jumped right into it, so I thought I'm just trying to catch up with you, Christian. So yeah, and that, I mean,
sure.
In all of our experience with our clients, I mean, it's I would say north of 50% of our current engagements involve some sort of hybrid deployment of SharePoint, not necessarily related to social, but from a cloud perspective. So I mean, our own experience bears out exactly what you're saying, Christian, and I think that in the past, my sense is that the cloud kind of all-in cloud predictions have not necessarily borne out when you look at the enterprise. Okay.
No, they haven't, and I think, yeah. Go ahead.
Cool. So wanted to talk about just the I think you've touched on much of this already, Christian, about Yammer or SharePoint 2013, and I think anything else that you would like to add in terms of folks in our audience that are kind of sitting on the cusp of making this decision? Any other kind of decision points or things to consider?
Well, I think that if you are new to SharePoint and social, and you're coming in looking for a cloud solution, then without a doubt, you want the most powerful social tool out there. It's the Yammer platform. That is the right answer. I mean, there are other benefits in the broader conversation. I mean, Office 365 has some huge strengths, like hosted Exchange, and as a solution. The link tools at that price point are fantastic. For Microsoft in the cloud and from the social standpoint, Yammer is the only answer. That's their big bet, and that's definitely where you want to go. However, if you have regulatory compliance issues or concerns, and whether these concerns about data in the cloud, those security, there are experts on both sides that will tell you different stories. But as you're mitigating those risks of moving workloads to the cloud, then you can still have powerful social collaboration experiences with SharePoint on-prem. So I'm in an organization that is using both and using them side by side, and we have use cases and scenarios that are valid for both, and using them both successfully.
Yeah, and that's been our experience as well. Is there anything with respect to the design of kind of an approach of social within SharePoint 2013 and within Yammer? Any differences in the way that those two products were kind of developed to address social, or is there not a significant difference?
Well, no, I mean, there are some differences. I mean, the way that social works inside of SharePoint, I mean, because Microsoft was developed and was launching prior to the Yammer acquisition, so they're two parallel but separate tracks. So the social features in SharePoint on-prem are based around the the interactions of your essentially your My Site interaction, which is kind of similar to that Facebook page, and that is similar with Yammer, but more of the collaboration is around that structured or document team site based collaboration, meaning that I've got all of those levels of permission trimming and controls in place, that structured collaboration. So, Rick, if you and I are on a team that where there's 5 of us that need to collaborate around this document, yes, there is the group, the private group capability in Yammer, but we have content that's tied to specific sites, and there's workflow and process and forms and kind of all those other things, that structured collaboration activity. But we also want to have the power of these social features. That is a SharePoint, largely SharePoint on-prem feature set. There is not that level of parity over in Yammer. Yammer, I mean, the philosophy of the company and the way that they approach is that collaboration should be open. That the benefits of participating in Yammer is that I can go put an idea, and I may flag that idea as like in my company's Yammer site. I have an evangelism group that I have where people can go and follow along with that, where basically every article that I write or activity that I'm doing on the road, I go and post to this this folder, and I tag it, and people can follow a specific tag, or they might join that group to see that level of activity. However, company-wide, if someone is going and searching for a specific answer to a question, or or wants to a specific topic or a tag, and goes up to the top level of Yammer and does a search, they're going to have access to all of that content, whether or not they're part of that group or following me specifically at that time. So they've kind of flattened the structure in that way. And so everyone can be involved, everyone can have a voice and share their expertise in whatever that dialogue is. Whereas in SharePoint, it is much more structured around the content, around those permissions levels. So depending on what you're trying to do, if I'm doing more of a broadcast message, I use Yammer for that. If it's around specific deliverables that are for a specific set of specific group, but I still want to get it out of email and have that conversation as part of the search results around that content, then I'm using SharePoint for those activities. It's my system of record for that content. So that's how I separate the two.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Really just depends on how people are working. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like the concept of the structured and unstructured and kind of a way to think about it. And I think, getting back to your earlier point, and we titled the webinar, SharePoint versus Yammer, but I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, it's looking at structured, unstructured, and then very well maybe you have some combination of the tools based on your specific use cases and how you're trying to apply this in a business context, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one of my favorite uses for Yammer, it is a fantastic extranet solution. And I've done this a couple times where I was organizing a SharePoint event here in the Seattle area, and we went and put together an external network and invited a bunch of people in, collaborated around that, and then once that was done, we shut down the network. So we went and used it for a temporary, temporary need. But we do this all the time. Like we had a marketing services firm that we were working with, and went and created this external network, and I was able to bring in people from 2 external companies, as well as people from within my company, and have this ongoing external network for that group of people. So I mean, it took a minute to go and set that up and invite them in via email and start collaborating. And that's very powerful. And you don't have that level of flexibility with SharePoint on-prem from an external standpoint, not even with Office 365. There's still some, to go in and give permissions to somebody that is, outside of your network. There's a little more effort involved and cost.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to turn to kind of implementation issues and just get your thoughts on, how best approaches for implementation, and also, best practices around user adoption and things of those nature. So anything you can share in that realm would be great.
Sure, and it's working for a product company, and I get these kinds of questions a lot. And we've got several partners that specialize in just this end user adoption aspect of that. And so I mean we work with partners like Portal Solutions that go in and kind of manage this aspect of things. But I mean certainly. There are things that I've done internally with this company, with my previous company, while working with Microsoft, in and around social features. I left Microsoft 4 years ago, and so the social features weren't part of the way that we worked. But we were doing some very kind of cutting edge, agile type development and project management activities. We're doing things in a different way, using if you're familiar with the Kanban model, for example, of going and prioritizing our various engineering and project management projects and activities. But anyway, that's a bit down in the weeds. But this is it really is a business analyst discussion with your teams. Prior to Microsoft, I was a consultant. I would go in, and what always happens is everybody says, well, here's the technology that we want to use, and I kind of go like, whoa, slow down. Let's have a conversation first. Help me understand how people are working today. What are your core use cases and the scenarios? How do you work within your team, within this business unit? What are your points of integration of communication with these other teams? As I said earlier, take a look at what they're doing outside of the approved tool set. Are they using Facebook? Are they communicating via Yahoo or LinkedIn groups? Are they using different free mobile apps to share information and collaborate in a way that's not secure, that's not approved by the company? Talk about what they're doing and why, and then I think it's key is then to look back at then the technologies, and in this case, SharePoint for structured and Yammer for unstructured, and look at the various collaboration methods there, and then have and map your needs to what those platforms do. And you may, there's decisions that you need to then make, where it could be that some of what needs to be done will best fits into the Yammer model. Some of those things you need more of a community hub. Others you need the structure of SharePoint and the automation that can happen with SharePoint, and then make some decisions based on what you understand, what the business needs, what the platforms can do. Then you're at a decision point. That's how I approach it. That's how I approach things as a consultant. And then said, if your insistent is that we're going to have one tool to do it all and force fit, you're going to have some limited success there. But because there is no single tool, single way to solve all of those needs. But if you can offer a range of solutions and show how those business activities can be accomplished through these tools, then you have a way for moving forward and with the strategy for social and collaboration in general.
Yeah, and I think the the example of the extranet use case you gave, I mean, that's kind of a very clear application of here's the use case, here's the tool we need that fits the specific use case. So I thought that was a good example.
Yep.
So we are. Questions are piling up, Christian. So let me turn to our audience, and I'll grab a couple of curveballs for you. So
sure.
So let's. So I'll read off. I'll just read off a couple of these, and then we can chat about them. So first question is, can you comment on approaches to transitioning from SharePoint's social conversations to Yammer?
So from a technical standpoint or from the process standpoint? I mean, so from a technical standpoint, I mean, there is no migration of those activities over into Yammer. So this is an important thing to think about. If you see your path in the next 2-3 years being primarily in SharePoint, and this is with any technology, if you can be productive and get what you need done in that current platform versus go to a newer platform that may not have all the features but you don't yet know the roadmap, I put on my project management hat to that and I say stick with what you know, with what's confirmed, what you know will meet your requirements today, and get value out of that for the next 2 to 3 years. However, if you see that, well, the company is transitioning away from this structured, SharePoint environment into the more unstructured, then I am a big believer in the side-by-side model, which is stand up Yammer, side-by-side. When new projects come online, say, does this make sense in SharePoint, or does this make sense over on Yammer? And what you'll see is that Yammer will just slowly start displacing those activities, and more will just move over, and at some point you'll be able to archive those old discussions, and kind of move away from that. Now there are other things where you can go in, on the back end, and crawl the content from both and provide kind of a federated view of the search results into that. I mean, there are other things that you can do technically, but at a high level, the recommended model is not to attempt to do any kind of migration, but just start displacing, sit them side by side.
Right. So let's see. We've got here's an Office 365 question. So
sure.
What about Office 365 SharePoint Online, where it's an either-or proposition? If you turn on Yammer, there's no going back.
So Yammer is becoming the interface, the social interface on Office 365. And there are some advances, like you're able to do discussions around a specific document, which kind of it fills that need of the kind of follow a document capability. Microsoft is going to, I don't know a specific roadmap. They're not making that roadmap very transparent, even to the expert community. However, they know that they need to build out, have that parity between what's available on-prem with the online experience, and so they are adding more and more features very rapidly to Office 365 to build out that parity.
Okay, so we got a few more. Let's see. Actually, let's go down to that one. Okay. Yeah, this is more possibly technical in the weeds stuff. So you're free to answer on you're not sure. So here's the question: if you use both Yammer and on-prem social, how do you or can you mesh the feeds together?
You can't mesh the feeds together, but in on-prem, so there is the ability to show side by side. There's with the Yammer, web part, and have that news feed. So and I'm not a search expert, and there are some folks that are trying to come up with a blended view of the search results against that. But I know from from the UI perspective, you have the ability to go and switch even on-prem and direct over and turn on the Yammer news feed, or you can do that side by side with that web part.
Gotcha.
So there is that option. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me go down. Let's get down that one. So we've got about 5 minutes. So why don't I throw one more to you, if that's cool, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Okay. Okay. The final question is could you just use a news feature or corporate news web part or community site in SharePoint 2013 on-prem for company-wide broadcast messages versus using Yammer?
You sure can. You can use the community site template in 2013. You can, you can do that. That's not very interactive. But for your requirements, it might meet your needs. That's there's some people that are saying that we can't do anything within the cloud. And look, I understand the reasoning behind that. I may not agree with all of that, but there are ways that you can go and do those activities. I think you have to go and look at, again, what is the culture of your organization? What are people doing where they're going around IT and these approved tools and processes to get their work done and to communicate? And are you being overly restrictive by insisting that we follow this model, and then people are going to do much less secure activities using these consumer apps? You need to recognize that the way that people work together and are communicating is increasingly through these social tools. And the day of reckoning is coming. You need to support some degree of functionality around social.
Right, right. Well, great. Well, we're coming up on the hour, so Christian, I want to again thank you so much for taking your time. I think this was a great session, and we have a fairly substantial backlog of questions. So I think what we'll do is try to take those offline, and then maybe between us here at Portal and you, Christian, maybe we can at least respond back to some of these folks and some of the questions. And
yeah, would be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Rick, why don't we do this? Why don't we go through and summarize, and let's do happy to add my comments to a blog post that you guys can post out there, and we can just go through and answer them.
Perfect. Sounds great. Sounds great. So wanted to go ahead and wrap things up, and one thing before we part company today, a couple of things in terms of follow-up. from a Portal Solutions perspective, if there's more in-depth conversation that you'd like to have, there's a couple of ways that we can kind of keep the conversation going. One of which is what we call our social strategy workshops. So right now we are offering a 2-hour complimentary workshop where we will get essentially get into the weeds in a similar type conversation that we just had with Christian to help you kind of work through the issues of mapping your business needs to social capabilities and helping you kind of accelerate your decision-making process. So that's one thing. The other thing is we're going to have another webinar on October 29th from 11 to 12, and we're calling that our, there we're going to focus specifically and break down different social features and talk about the use cases that are applicable for those specific social capabilities. So we think that, hopefully that'll be an informative session as well. So I think that is, I think that's all we had for today. And Christian, thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And let's keep the conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your participation. And by the way, a copy of this presentation, a link to it, will be emailed to you later today, as well as a copy of this slide deck. So thank you all for your participation, and have a great day, everybody.